G'day folks, welcome back to the channel. In this one we're going to talk about batteries. If you ever ask someone how they think that the energy grid is going to be supported purely by wind and solar, the response that they immediately come back with is loads of batteries. It all sounds such a great idea, doesn't it? But let's go through the reality of battery storage and we'll look at some stories and some facts about why battery storage is just not the answer. So wind and solar are weather dependent, that's pretty obvious. Solar doesn't work at night and wind power doesn't work when there's no wind. And so you have to be prepared for periods when there is no solar power and there's no wind power. These periods actually have a name in Europe. They're called Dunkelflaute, which is where you get an area of high pressure and anticyclone that sits stationary above the continent for days, possibly weeks on end, and the only weather you get is cloudy, overcast skies with zero wind. So solar power is generating virtually nothing and wind power likewise generating virtually nothing. So what do you do in those periods? Well, you have to have battery backup, which is storing the energy that has been generated when the wind was blowing and when the sun was shining, and can release it at some point in the future. Now, there are other types of storage that you can use, like pumped storage is another great example, where you pump water uphill into a reservoir when you've got excess electricity, and then you let it flow back down to generate electricity again when you have a shortage. But that only works in very specific areas of geography. We've got Snowy Hydro 2, which is going to be a pumped hydro storage thing. It's already billions of dollars over budget, and it won't provide anywhere near the storage that we will need. So I did some research. I went to look for how much battery storage you'd need in the east coast of Australia, that's kind of Brisbane, Sydney and Melbourne, to actually support a grid based on wind and solar. And so this is a very interesting paper which I found. It's by a very obviously energy savvy guy. I think he worked in energy. He's an engineer. God, what would they know? It would seem that Australian government authorities have not performed and made publicly available any analysis that provides any indication whatsoever in a readily understandable way how many big batteries will be required in Eastern Australia to meet the 100% renewable storage requirement, how they will be sourced and paid for, what are the energy requirements for their production, what are the waste disposal and CO2 emissions resulting therefrom, importantly, where these batteries are to be sited, and given their relatively short service life, how they will be recycled and reused. And this is another issue because just like EV batteries, these battery storage systems have a lifespan of maybe a decade, maybe 20 years if you push it. And all that time, the capacity will be going down and down. So what the capacity will be like after 20 years, nobody knows. It beggars belief that none of this absolutely necessary preliminary investigative work seems to have been addressed by the relevant Australian planning authorities. Well, of course it wouldn't have been addressed because they don't care. This is an ideology. For an analysis based on the AEMO operational demand data for calendar year 2023, to even begin to consider a 100% renewables scenario for the Eastern Australian grid, the present wind and solar energy facilities complement will need to be increased at a minimum by a factor of 3.31. The minimum storage requirement to provide coverage during the worst extreme prolonged minima in output of the renewables must be able to supply the full demand for a minimum period of 24 days. This translates to a storage requirement of 12,077,000 megawatt hours, equivalent to some 27,000 Geelong big batteries, or some 94,000 Hornsdale big batteries. 12 million megawatt hours. That's what you need to keep the grid going on batteries. And he goes on to put this into some context. Some 27,000 Geelong big batteries would occupy an minimum area of some 54,000 hectares. This does not include the area required for the corridors for the necessary connecting transmission lines. It is clear that government policy is to acquire rural lands for this purpose, rural lands which are predominantly farmland, that is, land used for food production. This makes it a very significant land grab. This land take is in addition to the considerable amount required for the additional wind and solar farms, each of which itself constitutes a very significant land grab. So that was just the summary, first page. Take a look at the link in the description to the whole document. But can you start to see just how ridiculous the idea of batteries being able to support even the modest scale of the Australian energy grid? Compare that to the entire country or the United States or Europe, and you start to see how much battery storage you need to provide for anything like the kind of situations. I mean, what happens if you have a week or 2 weeks of zero wind or very little wind and very little solar? Can people live without electricity? Of course they can't. And the cost and complexity of these batteries is just beyond belief. And yet this is the way that we're going. And instead of just strategically placing a few nuclear power stations around the country, which would solve all this problem immediately, we have to go down this insane path of windmills and solar panels backed up with ridiculous fantasy scale batteries. And in the UK, a couple of stories from the UK and one from the US about how residents are objecting to these battery storage systems because of the risk of fire, which we haven't even come on to yet. That is when you've got megawatt hours of lithium-ion battery storage that can suddenly spontaneously catch fire and burn for days and pollute vast areas around it. In the UK, there's an article in the Telegraph, a picturesque Yorkshire village is battling an ugly net zero facility, but it's everyone's fight. Despite local opposition, another area of British countryside can expect to be blighted by one of Labour's mega batteries. And of course, public local opposition just counts for nothing in this net zero madness, because they'll go ahead no matter what. What happens when a picturesque village in West Yorkshire learns that it is to be home to a new battery energy storage system, a BESS? As one might expect, the residents react with anger and mobilise to raise funds and fight the plans, despite being told it is key to Ed Miliband's quest to grow green energy, supposedly reduce bills, don't make me laugh, and keep the lights on. Don't make me laugh. They point out that the land chosen, which is used to grow food and borders a historic conservation area, isn't suitable. Of course it isn't. The BESS, which will look much like a large number of shipping containers lined up in rows, will scarcely blend in with the small village which is home to some particularly fine 17th and 18th century grade-listed buildings. This is the fault line running through Labour energy policy as it careers towards a 95% clean electricity target by 2030. Madness. The grid needs increasingly to store and manage intermittent, highly variable supplies of weather-dependent renewable energy. Yes, if you didn't have renewable energy, you wouldn't need all this nonsense. Put simply, when windmills and solar panels are producing more electricity than is wanted, the oversupply can be used to charge up a BESS. This avoids the need to pay renewables operators to stop producing power, a practice that cost us all £1 billion last year. When there isn't enough renewable output to satisfy demand, a BESS can put its stored energy back into the grid. No feasible amount of BESS could cope with long periods of low wind and sun, the Dunkelflaute phenomenon, like I just said. But they are essential for ironing out shorter-term spikes and troughs in a renewables-heavy grid. And correctly, it talks about the risk of fire. Another huge issue is the tendency of BESS installations to catch fire. In February, a battery site fire in Essex took almost 24 hours to put out, and a fire in Liverpool took over 2 days to extinguish in 2020. In January, a fire at one of the world's largest BESS plants in California led to the evacuation of 1,500 people and the closure of a major highway. Yeah, I did some videos on that. I'll link them up here. Such sites contain millions of battery cells, which, if not shielded or widely enough separated, allow fires to spread fast, spreading dangerous air and ground pollution. Unbelievable. The local West Yorkshire Fire Authority has already raised concerns about the proposed site at Heath. And in Massachusetts, in the US, near Boston, again, we have basically the same story. Duxbury residents speak out over proposed battery farm in residential neighbourhood. Developers are returning with a proposal to build a 5 megawatt battery storage facility, despite being turned down twice by the town. The residents are not happy. No, it'll get through eventually because net zero trumps everything, of course. Bright yellow signs reading "Stop lithium battery farms in residential zones, dot driveways, front lawns and trees in the neighbourhoods of suburban Duxbury on the South Shore." According to residents, the signs began popping up a few weeks ago when word began to spread that developers New Leaf Energy, oh that's nice and cuddly, were moving forward in their plans to construct a 5 megawatt battery storage facility behind a residential neighbourhood on West Street. Why would you want to live anywhere near one of these things? Duxbury has already rejected the project twice, beginning in 2023. But in June, the Massachusetts Land Court overturned the town's decision, citing the Dover Amendment, a law that protects facilities related to solar energy collection from unreasonable restriction, because they get a special pass. Renewables projects get this special status that means that they're harder to oppose. But there is some good news, and it's actually from the area where I hail from in the UK, the borough of Spelthorne, or the council area of Spelthorne. I'm not exactly sure what it's called. But a battery energy storage system that was going to be put into a beautiful part of the country, a little town called Shepperton, has been rejected. Brilliant. Council pulls plug on battery storage unit plan. A bid to build a battery storage farm in Surrey has been thrown out after councillors decided it did not justify building on greenbelt land. So back in the 60s, I think, there was this greenbelt plan, which was London was to be surrounded with this area of green land, undeveloped land, in other words, called the Green Belt, that was not to be developed on. I don't think that is still the case, although it is much harder to get things developed on Greenbelt land, and unfortunately no go. Sunbury BESS Limited wanted to install 50 industrial scale battery units, each the size of a shipping container, on 3.5 hectares of land in Shepperton between the M3 and a railway line. Officers previously said its climate benefits outweighed the harm to the green belt. Yeah, because net zero trumps everything, and you know what price to pay if we're saving the planet. But Spelthorne Borough Council's planning committee threw out the application, bravo, arguing there were not very special circumstances to justify bulldozing into greenbelt land. The company has been approached for comment. The scheme, designed to store energy for the national grid and release it when demand peaks, was pitched as helping the UK hit its climate targets. Unbelievable. Well, a piece of good news that one of these awful projects has been scrapped in the UK, but I fear it's against the tide of approvals and construction. It's just the same here in Australia. Mad plans to build thousands and thousands of megawatt hours of battery storage just to prop up a renewable grid that we don't need in the first place because we could just have nuclear. Madness. All right, that's it for this one. Thanks very much for watching. See you in the next one. Bye for now. If you'd like to support this channel and display your anti-EV credentials to your Tesla-owning neighbours at the same time, why not buy some awesome MGUY merchandise, like this mug, this baseball cap, or this t-shirt. Each high-quality item sports the MGUY No EVs sign, and they're all made to order, perfect for irritating the hell out of your local EV zealots. Visit store.mguy.tv or click the link in the description to check out the full range of products. And of course, you can always just buy me a coffee. Click the link in the description or scan the QR code on screen. Thanks very much for watching. Really hope you enjoyed it. If you've got any tips or stories, go there. If you'd like to watch another video, go there. If you'd like to buy me a coffee, go there. And please subscribe to the channel.